So as you've heard, the chanterelles are starting. Yay. Well, they've been started for a little while, but it just so happened one of our, actually Annie Weissman, you saw her do this a couple of months ago, and also do an INAT thing. She was like, hey, why don't we do some sort of comparison with chanterelles and false chanterelles? I said, that's a great idea. So Annie sent me this. And you can see here on the right, we've got some smooth chanterelles, and on the left, these are actually called the false chanterelle. These are Hygrophilopsis aurantiaca. And it just so happens we had a couple of members. One sent in some pretty good pictures of chanterelles, and one sent in some pretty good pictures of the Hygrophilopsis. So we'll move on and jump into those, and maybe we can kind of dispel some of your issues with trying to figure out if you actually have a chanterelle. Okay, so Corey found these somewhere in DC. Lovely flush there, and these are nice, happy, healthy chanterelles. You can see they kind of have like an orangish color on the top, bordering, they got some yellow in there too. And when you look at the underside, these are not true gills. These are false gills. So this is the hymenium. This is where the spores are produced. So this is the fertile surface. You can see it runs down the stipe or stem here. Looks like this one's got munched on by some slugs or something. But right here, it kind of looks white. A lot of times it'll be a little bit more peachy colored. But you can see there's a lot of cross veining, meaning, you know, they're kind of like almost spider webbing back and forth from the larger waves. This is very classic of chanterelles. Even with the chanterelles that have what look like gills, if you look close enough, you'll see that they are not true gills. They are just waves. So they're, you know, they're rounded at the base. So this is your Cantharellus lateritius. This is our classic smooth chanterelle. This is probably one of the most common chanterelles in our area. Well, good, larger, edible. I mean, there are a lot of the other Craterellus floating around. But so anyway, so this is pretty classic of the smooth chanterelles in our area. The frilly margin, they're not always as frilly as this. These just happen to have had really good conditions, and so if it's not really wet, they might dry out and you'll have an enrolled margin. But when they're happy and moist, they tend to have these ruffled edges. Okay, let's move on to the next guy. So Marilyn sent this in. You can see it's a little bit darker. A lot of times this is much darker than your orangey yellow chanterelle. But when you turn it over, you can see it has gills. Now, this one is a little confounding because I like to tell people that when you found you know, something that is not a chanterelle, it has knife-edged gills. This one can screw you up. It actually doesn't really have knife-edged gills. They are actually kind of rounded when you look at them. But a couple of things can help to look for that can definitely point out that it's not actually a chanterelle. So you can see these forks happening very often on this guy. Actually, let me do this. So this is Hygrophilopsis aurantiaca. It's the false chanterelle. Now, zooming in like this, you can see these are forks in the gills. It is a bit rounded if you look closely, but it's much darker orange. This one is actually lighter than they usually are. A lot of times it's almost bordering on red orange when you find these guys. Unfortunately, spore print isn't much help when it comes to trying to distinguish chanterelles, because these have pale spores too, as well as many of the other lookalikes. So it's really down to looking for characteristics. It's kind of hard to see the decurrent nature of these gills. I'm trying to remember if I have a different picture. Another thing about these is if you look at the substrate right here, this is rotted wood. And so these are actually growing from rotted wood. Most of the time you find them in conifer areas. So these are typically growing from well-decayed conifer, sometimes directly from these well-decayed conifer logs. So that's, it can look terrestrial because it's grown, it could be very well decayed, as you can see right here, but these are actually wood decomposers. They're not mycorrhizae. Excuse me. You can see as it goes closer to the stipe, it looks like the gills do start thinning out, but out here on the margins, it's definitely a bit more rounded, but it's forking. There are no cross veins. Darker orange, red gills, typically a darker cap, Hygrophorapsix aurantiaca, the actual false chanterelle, which is a wood decomposer. Okay, another one that's very common in our area, Chris Bowen sent this. He found this at Patuxent. Actually, I think he went either the day before or day after we went and saw these. So we actually saw some of these as well. These can be super common depending on the time of year. But you'll notice they have that fluted shape. But these guys are yellow. They are not orange. And if you can see right here, this is an old oak log or something decaying away. And these are growing directly from that log. So these are also wood decomposers. These help because they do have true knife-edged gills. They're very decurrent, running down the stipe is what that means. These also have dark fibrils. You can see here in the center of this guy right here. When they're young, they can almost look gray, not quite black, but gray or much darker. And what happens is the cap expands and it doesn't create more of these fibrils. The fibrils just spread out. So you see more of that yellow showing through from the fibrils, and it just doesn't happen as much in the center. And so this is why you see that darker gray or darker color in the center and more yellow as they get on the older ones. They're all funnel shaped, yellow throughout. It also has a pale spore print. This is a Geronima stromboides. They call it the wood-loving clitosobe because it used to be in clitosobe. I guess that we shouldn't use that now because people are gonna be like, why are you calling it a wood-loving clitosobe if it's a Geronima? But whatever. That's what it used to be. So this one actually Hygrophorapsix aurantiaca is said to be poisonous, but some people eat it. I would avoid it. This one is not necessarily toxic, but it's not very good. The one that you definitely need to be careful of is the jack-o'-lantern, and sorry, I don't have pictures of that one, but I can kind of give a little bit of explanation. So you've probably seen jack-o'-lanterns in the past. They are much brighter orange. They have decurrent gills. They actually have very knife-edged gills, similar to this. They're not as wimpy as this guy. These are like super flimsy little gills. Jack-o'-lanterns tend to have very orange gills. Also, if you rip open a jack-o'-lantern, it's orange on the inside. Chanterelles are going to be white on the inside, or like the Siberius type chanterelles. So that's a few little tidbits. Omphaliotis, that's the jack-o'-lantern, also grows from wood. And they tend to grow cespitose, which means in like clusters, like growing from a bouquet. But you can see them trooping similar to chanterelles. So always examine everything about your mushroom. So like if you get this guy, so Roy Fisher sent this, he found it at Gunpowder Falls. I don't know what you guys think of this. The Hymeneum, or fertile surface, you can see it's running down the stipe. So you can almost see where it starts because it's a very light color. And so that white color goes here. And a lot of times on the smooth chanterelles, they're more of a peachy color, and you can see where it actually stops on the stem. But this one has pretty well developed false gills. So I would, and plus it's a little bit more yellow. So the chanterelles right now are in a bit of a flux. I think they're realizing there's a whole lot more species of chanterelles than they previously thought. And so there's a lot of DNA studies and different things like that, trying to figure out what all we have. And the East Coast actually has more diversity than the West Coast. So we have a lot more different chanterelles here. But I would put this into the Sabarius group. Sabarius is actually a European species, so I don't know that they've even worked out what to call this guy, and I have not delved deep. I don't think the scientists have really figured out where to put some of these things. But that being said, if you know you've got a chanterelle with these false gills or wavy margin, all of the chanterelles are edible. So just make sure you have something in that genus. So anyway, that's why I put Cantharella species, because it's kind of like a Sabarius because it has more well-defined gills or false gills. Either way, they're all fun to find. Looking closer, you can see, like in the Hygrophilopsis, it did not have cross veins. And so cross veins are these guys, where it kind of had forks like this, but they were not crossing over. And you can see it's real, just clumpy up in here, and it's got a little bit more of a ruffled margin as well. All right, moving on. So Roy also found these over in Gunpowder Falls. Anyway, I hope I kind of gave you a little lowdown to help you try and figure out false from true chanterelles. And it sounds like John's going to give you a little quiz in a minute. So the guy on the left here is actually not a fungus at all. It's actually a slime mold. This is Tubifera ferruginosa. They call it the raspberry slime. There are some that look very similar to this. And when I was looking for, I thought there was one that looked like raspberry slime, but it doesn't have as distinct little dimples or pimples looking bumps here. And it might actually be in the Tubifera as well. It's just a different species. The other one over here, which I don't know if you noticed, there's a little ant crawling on it. I thought that was kind of cool. This guy is one of the eyelash cups, and you can kind of see them here on the edges. This is a Scutellaria. I put Scutellata because that's kind of like the common one, but there are tons of these little eyelash cups, and they could be small, they could be more yellow, they could be more orange or red. You have to measure how far apart these little eyelashes are. I couldn't get it very good zoomed in, but you can see the little eyelashes here all along the edge. And so depending on how many per millimeter and all this stuff, so that can split it into different species. So if you don't mind lumping, you could put this into Scutellina scutellata, or the eyelash cup. All right, this one was submitted by Corey. He found this walking through DC as well, and I should have hidden this picture first. Let you try and look for it over here in this picture. You see this huge happy beech tree, and right up in here is the mushroom growing in the little crack in the tree. Typically, these are, I thought they were more associates with oak, but it seems like oak and beech, a lot of these mycorrhizals are kind of happy with either or. So apparently it doesn't mind growing with beech, and it must be, it must have just been happy to find something here, because kind of looks like it's saprobic and eating the wood, but this is actually a mycorrhizal mushroom. So it's actually has a symbiotic relationship with the tree. And this is Retiboletus ornatopes. I couldn't really zoom into this to kind of show you a better shot of the stalk, but Marilyn actually sent in a different picture of a different Retiboletus ornatopes, and you can see the deep reticulation on the stipe of this guy. So if you were to see this in better resolution, it would look a little bit more like this. And so that's reticulation. It's the web-like pattern that grows on the stipe of some boletes. All right. April Wyman sent this in. She went out to Strawberry Hill in Pennsylvania. Cool little guys. The one here on the left is one of the worm corals. It is Clavulinopsis. I'm calling it Aurantios cinnabarina. There are other similar worm corals, but this one looked like it had a bit more of a bright reddish orange color to it. Fusiformis is looks very similar, and that could be what this is. It might just be the way the photo was taken. So anyway, it's more of a color thing, and they can kind of look very similar. This other guy on the right is Tremelodendron. This is a very common mushroom. There's quite a bunch up right now. They're kind of slow growing. And you'll see I've got it listed as false coral, and that's because it's not actually a true coral. It's actually more, it's related to jellies as opposed to the corals. But it's very common around here. All right, Tom Moore submitted this guy, and it's a big knobby clump on the whole outside of a big old, what looks like an oak tree. And sometimes polypores will do this, and it kind of makes you go, well, is this what it really looks like? Or is this immature? And will it change over time? And so sometimes it's really hard to tell. And so I was like, I wonder if this might be Dalia quercina, like the thick maize oak polypore, and it just hasn't made caps. And so this is kind of an example of that. You can see it would normally have these really pretty distinct caps growing, but the underside is pretty gnarly like this. I really think it might be Spongiopellis pachyodon, which is what this guy is. And you can see this has more of a toothy look. This one's almost poroid with some teeth forming, and maybe over time it'll grow, the teeth will grow longer, and you'll start getting some caps growing over the top. Or it could just be something that is growing weird. There's other things. Of course, there's tons of stuff I don't know. And so sometimes you just have to throw a name on it, like scop, which is some kind of polypore. Got that from John, one of our old Foray Chair guys. He was a really good guy. But anyway, scop. It's easy, it's quick, and it tells you don't know what the heck that is. All right, so Marilyn Mendel went out to Yosemite National Park and found a couple of lichens. So I'm going to let Tom jump in here because he's much better at the lichens and is much more familiar with stuff like this. So I'll let him jump in and just tell me how you like me to do it. There's a couple slides here with lichens.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Mitch. You can still run the controls if you would, and I'll just talk about the slides. I think there's only 2 or 3 of them.
It's just, yeah. Go ahead.
So it's very exciting. We get to talk about lichens. we don't often get to do this at our monthly meetings. Maybe we should make this part of our standard what's in your neck of the woods. So, so this very first one, this is a really cool lichen, and that bright chartreuse in this photo, it isn't because this is a photosynthesizing green plant. It's because this is a lichen that's absolutely full of the yellow pigmented vulpinic acid that gives it its name and its color. This is called the wolf lichen. There are two species of wolf lichens in North America, and they both reside in the Pacific Northwest. This one is called Letharia columbiana. This is called the brown-eyed wolf lichen. Those little brown disc shapes, those are the apothecia. That's the sexual fruiting bodies of the lichen. The other species, just the common wolf lichen, lacks those, and it's thought that it reproduces almost exclusively by asexual means. This genus of lichens, it's been used for centuries and centuries by farmers in Europe in much less enlightened times to kill wolves and foxes. That volpinic acid is poisonous. So this lichen used to be dried and ground, and then it was typically mixed with ground glass, and that mixture was sprinkled on top of meat, and the meat would be left outside for the animals to consume.
Wow.
Between the poisonous volpinic acid and the ground glass, that would cause internal hemorrhaging and eventually the animal's death. The volpinic acid, by the way, and I just read this in Ernie Brodo's big book on lichens, which is really
It is a big book.
door stopper. It was also used in California by the native peoples there. They used to use it as a poison on their arrow tips. They would mix this with snake venom and dip their arrow points into it. But probably the most common traditional use of this lichen was, unsurprisingly, it's been used as a fabric dye, where that volpinic acid, unsurprisingly, gives a nice bright yellow dye. So I think that's everything I have.
Very cool.
Lichens.
That thing is fantastic. I love the reticulation or the growth pattern on it. It's beautiful. It's really cool.
So this is another good one to have in your search image. This is one of the most common lichens in all of North America. It probably is, along with the common green shield lichen. This is probably the most common lichen that you'll find. This is called the common hammer shield, and Parmelia sulcata. And it's so named for those white marks that you can see all over the surface. Those little white marks, it makes it look like it's been hit by a hammer, and it has those little ridge lines. The white marks are called pseudocephalae, and the purpose that they serve is they regulate gas exchange with the medulla underneath, the white medulla underneath, and permit gas exchange through the cortex. So this is another one that has some traditional uses, and the first, let's see. So this lichen, as I was saying, it is super, super, super abundant, but Maryland is basically the southern extent of its range. So as you travel north, you will often see this thing growing in parks and rest areas, especially right on top of things like picnic tables, because this lichen is really pollution tolerant as well. It's a Parmelia sulcata, and in this genus, Parmelia, these have traditionally been used for fabric dyeing as well. All the lichens in this genus contain salicylic acid, which makes those rusty oranges and red browns that were traditionally used in lichens harvested in Scotland to make Harris tweed. So that's everything I have on those two.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, when I first looked at it, I was like, oh, looks like rock tripe. And then I talked to Tom and he mentioned the hammered shield, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, well, of course, look at these little, dimples all over it. It's really kind of cool. And very striking once you realize to look for that. It's really neat. All right, well, that's it for me. Be careful of the velociraptors. Anyway, I thought that was a funny little picture. Anyway, thanks everybody. Hopefully I helped you clarify a little bit of info from Chanarelles.